Welcome and thanks for being here. I'm Rebecca Ravenel. I'm the board chair of the James Renwick Alliance for Craft. I'm also the organizer of this Distinguished Artist Series. Um, the mission of JRACraft is to foster connoisseurship, education, and support for American craft. And we do that through various events, talks, trips, and tours. You can find all that information on our website. Today, actually, I wanted to say we have our executive director, Jennifer Scanlon, here today, and she's going to say a few words.
Yeah, I'm just really excited to be here. I'd like to welcome everybody who's tuning in from all over and remind people that are tuning in from closer to the DC area that this is a two-part series, and we will also have a in-person talk and demo. And I know that Ted is bringing us all kinds of tools and things to look at in person, so that should be really exciting. I believe we are almost completely full for that. So if that was something you wanted to sign up for and haven't yet, now is your last opportunity. But just glad that we can both have this virtual community together. Excited to see everybody that's here, and really appreciative both to Ted and to Rebecca, who always organizes these really interesting talks, and to Perry, who's in the background making it all work. Okay, thank
Thank
you
God
all.
for Barry. So we are thrilled to have Ted Lott here this afternoon to give us some insight into his work. As Jennifer said, later this week he will be with us in person at the Heinrich House Mansion in DC. He's going to demonstrate his technique for making architectural wood sculptures. Just before we begin, just a few housekeeping tips. We welcome your questions and comments, and at the bottom of your screen, you have both a chat and a Q&A button. If you have questions for Ted, please type those into the Q&A, and we'll get to that at the end of his presentation. If you want to chat with each other or have notes for JRA staff, put that in the chat, please. Great. So Ted Lott's exquisite wood sculptures are mashups of found objects and classic timber building techniques. With each piece, he creates a change in scale and purpose that generates a new understanding of the logic, function, and systems involved. Welcome, Ted.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Rebecca and Jennifer. Um, and just really happy to be here, everybody. I saw some names of people that I know, so I'd like to thank those that for coming. And I'm going to go ahead and just um, pull up the slideshow to start out here. Um, it's really an honor to be here and to have my work recognized by the Renwick Alliance. I'm really looking forward to my talk on Saturday. Um, and yeah, I just want to start out telling you a little bit about myself, a little bit about my background, and um, and I'll walk you through um, my work and a little bit about my process. And then at the end, I think we'll have time for questions. So um, bear with me if there's something that I do miss. Um, so I am a Midwesterner, born and bred. I'm from the America's Dairyland, great state of Wisconsin. And I currently live in Michigan, Western Michigan, just outside of Grand Rapids. Um, and I'm a woodworker, a sculptor, a furniture maker, a little bit of everything as far as that goes. And um, I guess about my background, I went to art school. I went to the Maine College of Art, which is a fabulous little art school in the Portland, Maine. Um, and I graduated from there in around 2005, 2006 with a degree in woodworking and furniture design. Um, so I didn't intend on studying woodworking and furniture design when I went there. In fact, they didn't even have a woodworking department. I ended up joining the first ever graduating class of the woodworking department at Maine College of Art. Um, but I went there with the idea of studying sculpture, and I started taking woodworking classes just to kind of beef up my knowledge of that particular medium. And it just really resonated with me. Um, and so I decided to become a major. Um, and that's where my woodworking journey began. So my current work centers around um, the idea of balloon framing, or some people might have heard it referred to as stick framing. Basically, the use of pre-milled, standardized lumber to create structures. So you'd be familiar with the 2x4, um, 2x6, 2x8. So in woodworking, there's a lot of focus that is made on traditional glued joints, such as the Morrison tenon or the dovetail joint, and but in architecture, really only the most high-end structures today use those methods. Um, most residential and many commercial structures in the United States and all over the world are made using the balloon framing or stick framing method. Um, and so I was in graduate school in Madison, Wisconsin, which was I graduated in about 2011, um, and I was studying there in the woodworking and furniture department for 3 years. And during that time, I came up with this method of creating sculptural and functional objects out of this miniaturized 2x4 method. Balloon framing is an American invention. It was documented in the Chicago area in the mid 1800s. Um, Unlike previous methods, which used locally available timber, stone, clay, and brick, balloon framing was the first fully industrial method of residential construction. So it relied on standardized timber and industrial produced nails to create like the structure. So interestingly enough, before the invention of the industrialized nail, all nails were forged by hand by a blacksmith. So they were actually incredibly valuable. So to create a structure like this using lots and lots of nails would have been cost prohibitive. In fact, there's instances documented nails being so valuable of settlers who were moving towards the American West actually burning down the buildings they were leaving behind in order to collect those nails from the ashes. So this sort of I became interested in this industrialized version of architecture because it's reflective of the society that we live in. We live, like it or not, in an industrialized world. Um, so the other major component of a stick frame construction is, of course, wood. And America was at that time, and still is to a large extent today, a land of abundant timber resources. So this industrialization, including the invention of the steam mill and the railroad, allowed these 2x4s to be produced and then shipped to towns and cities. And as the popularity of this method of construction spread, you could get a complete house kit from the Sears Roebuck catalog. So this is a page from the Sears Roebuck catalog circa 1908. And for less than $2,500, can you believe it? You could get all of the materials to build this house delivered on a railroad car to your local railroad yard, and then you'd move that stuff to your site and you would build your house. It had everything. It had all the nails, all the siding, all the lumber, all the plumbing, all the plaster you would need. Um, this particular model is known as a four square because of its 4 rooms upstairs and down. Um, and you can find versions of this house in every town and city from Maine to California and all over the North America. So it's really a um, widespread version. And there are many other designs that were available through this year's robot catalog and others that did essentially the same thing. Um, so that was the genesis of this series of work that I call the attenuated architectures. This piece is titled Foursquare because it was modeled on that previous Sears Roebuck Foursquare house. The idea behind this body of work was to take these common everyday middle class, working class structures and to elongate them vertically so that they become um, akin to towers or steeples or skyscrapers, these kind of aspirational structures that we look up at and kind of, spark our imagination. Um, a little bit about the scale of these because I know it's hard to tell. This piece, Foursquare, is just shy of 11 feet tall. So an average 5 or 6 foot person would come up to about here on that. So they really are quite large. Um, you know, so this body of work was developed in 2008, and that was just after the 2008 housing crisis crashed the global economy. That was at this point many middle class families had lost their homes, and it caused a lot of people to sort of question that idea of the American dream that you work hard and you save your money and you invest in a home and you're going to have a good life for you and your kids. Um, so that was a lot of what was in the air and what I was thinking about when I built this piece. Um, this piece, False Front, is another part of that series. And again, it's approximately, the same scale, about 11 feet tall. Um, False Front is modeled after a real particular structure that I found in the Library of Congress's National Historical Building Survey, and it was a structure from Southern California. But you can find, again, structures like this all over the United States and North America. Um, uh, Usually, a false front structure is associated with like Western landscapes, and you can see up here, it's a regular gable end structure, but then they have this little squared off end piece here, and that's kind of delineated that this was a commercial as opposed to a residential structure, and they would have a lot of times lined the main street of a town. Um, Often these buildings were built by immigrants, people who would operate their business out of the bottom floor and then live up above until such time that if they were successful, then they could maybe build a separate house and then, rent out that space or expand their business. But this is an emblematic American architectural archetype, and again, elongated in that vertical way. Speaking about the aspirations, but also about kind of our feeling a little bit out of reach, maybe for some people at that time. And again, not that hasn't changed that much today. A little bit about the process of these. Here's an installation shot. Um, as you can see, they're really large and a little bit unwieldy. So one of the things I had to think about when I made these pieces was how are they going to be moved, transported, stored, etc. So that's where my background in furniture making really came in handy with this body of work. So each one of these pieces is each side or wall is a separate individual panel, and they connect together using a series of dowels and magnets. And so what you would do is you would pop the roof off, and then each panel would come off individually and get flat packed down into a crate, and then the roof sits down onto the foundation piece down here, and then that goes in a separate crate, and then you can pack, move, ship, and store the pieces. So there's a lot of engineering that goes into both just the pieces themselves and also into the idea. You only have to make one piece that doesn't fit through a door to really learn your lesson about that. And I'm telling you, I can speak from experience on that. Uh, so a little bit more about the process. Each one of these pieces is built from some 2x4s. They're not actual 2x4s. They're scaled 2x4s. So they're about 5/8 of an inch by a little over a quarter inch. And I mill them by hand on a bandsaw. And they retain a little bit of the texture of the bandsaw on them. And that harkens back to the Industrial Revolution and the first, steam-powered sawmills. A lot of them were bandsaw mills. So, this historic timbers actually would have retained that kind of markings on them as well. So, move forward. So that was my thesis work, and then in 2011, I was invited to spend several months as an artist in residence at the Anderson Ranch Art Center, which is in Colorado, just outside Aspen. Um, During that time, I was thinking a lot about the material, the visual, the historical connections between the furniture and architecture. And this piece, Sit Stay, actually developed at the end of my residency. And this piece really became the seed, the germ of a lot of the work that came afterwards and that I'm still doing today. This particular piece of furniture had been sitting outside of the wood shop at the art center, and it belonged to a staff member. And I kind of inquired gently towards the end of my residency, once I'd gotten to know him a little bit, if he was actually going to do anything with it. And he said, you can have it. And he gave it to me, and I was just really inspired by the architectural qualities of this piece of furniture, and to take that and then to adapt it and sort of mash up those architectural spaces and those furniture spaces and explore that connection between the two. So in Western culture, the history of furniture design is really intimately connected with that of architecture. Going back only a few hundred years, there weren't separate professions for carpenters and furniture makers. People who worked with wood were referred to as joiners, and they would often split their time between building houses in the warmer months, and then in the colder months they would move inside and create furniture. Um, so this piece is called a high chest of drawers. It's from the Boston area around 1730, 1740. And of course, this is a very high-end piece, would have been in a home of a very wealthy, well-to-do person. But you can see those connections between architecture and furniture all over once you start looking for them. This upper part of the doorway in this piece is called a swan's neck pediment, and this is an example of Georgian architecture, which falls under the greater rubric of neoclassical architecture, which was very popular at the time. That started in the early to mid 1700s, and so in America that's very popular because that's concurrent with the formation of colonialism and the American experiment, as we call it. It's also considered a reflection of the democratic ideals that were influenced by the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was influenced by the interest in the history of the Greek and the Roman republics, and those were sparked by, partly at least, the excavations of Pompeii and the reconstruction of the Parthenon. So people were looking back in history to create their modern precedents at that time. Um, so those of you in the DC area are familiar very much with the neoclassical tradition. Um, America partly chose this style of architecture at its founding to connect itself with the democratic ideals of the Greek and the Roman republics. So specifically, like in Rome, that America had overthrown a king and established a republic in its place, and that was very much on the mind of the founding fathers. Now, there's a lot of contemporary critiques about these forms of architecture. Um, we know now that historically those Greek and Roman temples and civic structures were not necessarily all gleaming white. They were, in fact, sometimes painted very bright, beautiful colors. And there's some very good critiques out there that kind of also parallel the idea of the whiteness that was embraced by um, this period of American neoclassicalism as being reflective of the whiteness of the dominant culture and the white male landowning who were the only ones who were considered able to vote at the time. And I don't disagree with that. In fact, I think that's a very valid criticism, but I also think it's worth um, remembering that connection between these democratic ideals and the architecture of the time was very much in the forefront of the people who were doing the building. So from that to this is a 3-seat Hepplewhite settee. Looks a little dirty and dingy because it was. I found this piece in the at a garage sale in upstate New York. And I'm attracted to these pieces that seem to have a history, that have, you know, some background to them. And I like to take those pieces that have this, you know, inherent patina and history and find a way to rejuvenate and renew and repurpose them into something else. So that 3-seat settee was turned into this piece, Carpenter Gothic #1. Um, I talked a little bit previously about exploring that connection between furniture and architecture. Now, in these pieces, that kind of mashup is really important. When you think about furniture, it's designed around the scale of the human body. So a chair is of certain height because that's how long your legs are. It's a certain depth and a certain angle of the back because that's what's comfortable to sit in. Likewise, architecture is designed around the scale of a human, the size of a doorway, the height of a single step, the location of a doorknob. Those are all intentional decisions that have to do with the scale of the human body. So by taking these two scales and putting them into one object, I'm hoping to kind of encourage the people to think more deeply about those connections in the environment. One of the things that I love about these pieces, and especially when I get a chance to show them and be there to see people interact with these works, is that people really um, engage their imagination when they come to it. A lot of things I get comments like, "Oh, I'm ready to move right in," or "I could see myself living there," or "I want to go exploring," something like that. And to me, that's really important because it sort of highlights this idea that or this capacity that humans have to sort of use their imagination to project themselves inside of this space. And to me, that's like really important because it's engaging the imagination. But I think of those ability to project your imagination as very almost also akin to empathy, and that the ability to project yourself into somebody else's emotional space or to resonate with somebody who's experiencing something outside of yourself. I think that's really an important thing, an important capacity of humans. And I think, something that we can probably used to encourage more of in these days. Um, so a lot of my work has, for a long time, obviously included these found objects. I'm a collector. Some might say a hoarder. My wife being one of them. I've been known to stop the car at a promising looking junk pile or to take her on a date to a go thrifting. Um, I'm always keeping an eye out for these objects that speak to me about their history. And then the design of these objects really create the design of the objects that I made for them. So this piece, Carpenter Gothic #2, you can see the shape of the crest rail of this um, chair is echoed by the shape of the top of these windows. So I'm really trying to take those architectural cues from the object and then reflect them in the piece that I'm building. And this particular piece, it's also a functional piece. So I really do imagine these pieces being used by whoever ends up with them in their home, in their lives. So I like to think of them a little bit about like cabinets of curiosity. If you're familiar with those, they're just sort of areas where you can take the little interesting pieces from your life, things that you've collected, and put them in there, and then kind of create your own space. And just like a home, you have the four walls and the roof and the floor, but what you make of it is really your own in each individual house. Um, so, like I was saying, the architectural elements they come from the piece that I'm working with. So, in this case, habitation #4, it was a really simple, industrial, minimal stool. So it suggested a more minimal, modern approach to the object. Um, and I'm going to go here and I'm going to share a video here. This is a build video of that piece that we just looked at, habitation #4. I did that in the residency I did at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which is in Indiana, Pennsylvania, right outside of Pittsburgh. Um, as you can see, I do tend to work from more or less the bottom up, um, just like you would build a real house. Um, you get bonus points when you're watching this if you count how many shirts changes I have, so you can learn how many days it took me to build this thing. When I'm building these, I do start out with a general sketch, but I don't have like full, complete blueprints. There's a fair amount of improvisation that goes along. With this piece, I do remember like I had gotten to this point and I realized, it didn't seem complete. And I was like, well, it needs a staircase. It needs something that can actually access it. So you see that is end up being the last piece of the puzzle that I built. And you may notice that there's a lot of these pieces that have lights in them. The lights are a real important part to me. Not all of the pieces are lit, but many of them are. And to me, that is partly connected to this idea of being a furniture maker and kind of thinking about function and kind of like these pieces are sometimes just sculptures, but also with that light, it creates a little bit of a idea of function too, like, and also what I really love is like when you have one of these pieces on, especially if it's night and you're, looking at it, it reminds me of that feeling of sort of coming around the bend or over the hill and seeing your home in the distance at night and seeing that warm glow. And it's just kind of that feeling of home or of belonging that's really resonant with me. Um, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But this piece is a little bit different. This piece was made at the Haystack Mountain School of Crafts at their open studio residency, which took place in 2013 is when I attended. So this piece, I took a log out of the forest. And I cut a section out of that log. I used that section that I cut out to mill from that material all the miniature 2x4s and boards that I used to create this structure that occupied that 12 inches that I took out. And then I took the whole piece and I put it back into the forest, and it stayed there for the rest of the summer. Um, uh, I was really interested in that kind of cycle and where that material comes from. Um, I used at the beginning of all of this work, I used primarily softwoods like pine, fir, spruce, um, and that's what's traditionally used in stick or balloon framing. And the reason for that is not just because they're cheap and abundant, and um, which they are, which is very good, but also because with a softwood, you can drive a nail into it without splitting it or having the nail turn or bend over. So it's actually a physical property of the softwoods that makes them very well suited to this kind of architectural building. Um, so I've been talking a lot about the different schools that I attended and the residencies that I've done. So during this part of my life, I really was doing a lot of moving. And in fact, even before this, I had been moving constantly. The longest I had lived in any one place was for a long time, was the 3 years that I had spent in grad school. So this idea of this kind of peripatetic lifestyle, moving every few years or a few months, um, was really on my mind when I made this piece, Mobile Home. So this, it can be an exciting lifestyle. It's also a little bit unstable, and like that, this piece is a little bit precarious. Um, so this piece also uses a combination of the stick framing scaled methods I developed, along with furniture making techniques. These legs are all steam bent and ebonized. So steam bending is when you heat a piece of wood with steam until you can then kind of plasticizes it and you can bend it, and then once it cools, it'll help hold that shape. And ebonizing is a chemical process where you use the tannins inherent in the wood to actually um, cause the wood to dye or turn itself black. So that is a couple of furniture techniques that are used in my work. Um, Again, this idea of home. This piece, garment, is a scale model of the house that I grew up in and my family still owns in Wisconsin. Um, so it is built around a external frame hiking pack, and that those are my legs. That's me actually wearing it. So it's both an object, but it's also a performance. Um, so I'm kind of thinking about this idea that you carry your home with you wherever you go. Um, so in this case, I was teaching at Murray State University in Western Kentucky. And I built this piece while I was there, and then I performed it for the first time on campus, and this is where those photos was taken. Um, it was really fascinating experience because you kind of got three different kinds of reactions. You got the people who would barely look up from their phones as you rode by, which I thought was a little odd because, I mean, this is an out of the ordinary experience. Then you got the people who were, clearly visibly a little bit frightened by so they would give you a really wide berth. And then you got people who were really interested. I remember this guy because he stopped. He talked to me for about 20 minutes. He wanted to know all about what I was doing, why I was doing it. He was really interested in it. I believe that he was an international student from Lebanon or something, which was very kind of him. But the piece actually is quite heavy. It weighs about 80 pounds. So at the end, I did have to say, well, excuse me, I have to go take this off because it is the weight of a very heavy hiking backpack. So at that same time, I was making that piece. I also made this piece. This is migration number one. Like I talked about previously, I had been moving a lot around, and so that was on my mind. But also, at the time, and still obviously today, immigration was a major hot button issue. Um, so the migration series is sort of built to address that. Um, in my feeling, you know, these pieces are important because this country is really built by immigrants. Whether you've been here for generations or your family just arrived, or if you're a Native American, you've been here for thousands of years. Um, we most of the people in this country are immigrants. This country was built by immigrants. And most of those people arrived with little more than a few suitcases or trunks, and that was all that they could carry. So the migration is really, an acknowledgement of that complicated history. And, even today, America is a highly mobile culture. Americans move an average of 11.7 times in their lifetime, which seems like a lot, especially when you compare it to Europe. Europeans only move an average of 4 times in their life. Um, and there's a great quote about immigration in America that I like. It goes, "You can go to live in France, but you can't become a Frenchman. You can go to live in Germany or Italy, but you can't become a German, an Italian. But anyone from any corner of the world can come to live in the United States and become an American." And I really love that quote. And if you're thinking, what liberal, commie, Marxist might have said that particular quote, that one is from Ronald Reagan. Um, so on that theme, this migration series, one of the things that I've really um, love about this series is there seem to be endless iterations. This particular piece, migration number 5, is built on another vintage suitcase. And again, it's this sort of um, urban commercial structure, or what we would call today a mixed use, where downstairs there's a commercial area and upstairs there's some living areas. And again, this would have been a typical type of structure built in an urban or a town that would have, you know, very likely been built by immigrants who would come to this country. They would run their businesses from downstairs and they would live upstairs. It was a very common occurrence. Another thing that I was thinking about American mobility is, of course, our love of the road, the road trip. So this piece, migration number 13, is sort of a celebration of that culture. But one of the great things that um, I love about working with these vintage suitcases is these are, circa 1920, 1930, 1940, 50. They were all built using actual wood. So underneath this red sort of faux alligator skin cover is about a 1/4 inch piece of wood. And then the leather corners pieces are actually stitched through that wood using what I could only imagine was a very powerful sewing machine. But because of they're made out of wood, they work really well with my process, which uses almost exclusively nails. I use a little pneumatic pin nailer. It's a tool that's designed to be used by finish carpenters because it leaves a really tiny hole behind. Um, and so, when I'm making pieces like this, there's almost no glue involved at all. I'm using mechanical fasteners like nails and sometimes screws, but only very sparingly to create these pieces. And you can see on the inside, this particular piece is the back panel is a piece of vintage linoleum that was taken out of a old house that was slated for demolition. So again, this connection between the design of the architectural space and the design of the object that I'm building with is really important. These sort of streamlined luggage case, they really evoke this sort of Art Deco, streamlined era in American design history. And so I try to reflect that in the pieces. This particular piece, Migration Number 24, was a commission. I picked up a series of cases when I was in Maine teaching at Haystack, and there were 3 cases, and they were monogrammed ART. They're in the corner at a junk store that I visited with my students picking stuff up for the class I was teaching. And of course, I couldn't pass that up, so I actually bought them and then shipped them home. And then I've been working on those. I worked my way through 2 of them so far, and I've got 1 left. Another great residency that I was able to do was at the Kohler Arts Industry Program in Kohler, Wisconsin. Um, their arts industry program is really fantastic. They invite artists to come in and work inside the factory and to create pieces using all the materials and equipment in the factory. So I was invited as part of the foundry program to come in. So I was able to work with the mold making and the casting materials that they use to make all their cast iron sinks and tubs, and the brass foundry that they use to make their faucets and that kind of hardware. So these pieces are again about 9 feet tall. The legs are made out of cast iron, and then the houses are made out of cast brass, which is very much almost exactly the same as bronze. So these pieces were photographed rather early after I had just installed them, but they've actually mellowed to a really incredible patina where there's a kind of a dark rust color on the legs, and then the light green bronze patina on the houses. And again, this idea of home and movement are really themes in my work, and it continued with this piece. Now, the habitation series is one that's ongoing. This particular piece, Habitation 10, this was a piano stool. Found it in a junk pile, cleaned it up. Turned out it was made out of this beautiful walnut wood, and I just sort of suggested this piece that was a little bit more playful than and really fun to make. The actual top of this piece rotates back and forth because it's a piano stool. So a piano stool like this has a threaded rod that goes down into the base. So you can turn this structure and it will go up and down. So thus you couldn't have a fixed staircase to go with it. So thus the rope ladder that provides the quote unquote access uh, in this piece. A little bit of a detail there. Um, the Dwells series is another series that is ongoing, and these pieces tend to be more functional, although they retain a very heavy sculptural element. I imagine these pieces as sort of side tables or end tables. And again, the light inside, is a little bit about the function of it, but it's also a little bit about the idea of just like this creating this really warm, inviting space. I have experimented with LEDs, but I really prefer these tiny, small, incandescent bulbs that I use because I think they create a quality of light that really reflects that idea of hominess or comfort. Um, this is another piece from the migration series. So again, thinking about immigration and migration in this country, and the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, in the mid 1800s, and I think it was something like 12.7 million people came to this country in the short span of 20 or 30 years, um, and that was really coinciding with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, and there was a real demand for people to work in the factories, and a lot of times people would come with trunks like this. They're called a steamer trunk because you were going on a steamship with them, and they would contain everything that that person, if they were lucky. And then some people who were fleeing really extreme poverty and authoritarian governments and persecution would not even be so lucky as to have that much to bring with them. So to take one of these pieces, these old steamer trunks, and turn it into, this idea of this my creating a home, and just really powerful for me. Again, you know, this series, the habitation series, especially draws on the design elements of the found objects that I'm working with to create this architectural spaces that I build. So this piece, Habitation 11, was a really modern, kind of space age base with a dark wooden base, but then a really um, nice curvature. So that really suggested a really modern approach to the architectural space up above. And again, so this had originally been a lamp, and while I consider these sculptures, I also consider them pieces of furniture insofar that not only are they lights or lamps, but also there's these doors here allow you access to the interior of the space, so you could actually use it as a small cabinet of some kind. Um, let's see. I'm getting a little short on time. I've only got a few more slides left, but I just want to shoot through again this Dwell series. This piece is a little bit of a departure because instead of the um, balloon frame or stick framing method, this piece uses mortise and tenon construction. But I really did that because I wanted to reflect the design of this really beautiful found modern chair. It was really, really visually light chair. So I wanted to create a really visually light but still functional cabinet out of it. So this cabinet is all made out of mortise and tenons, and then it's clad in the vertical siding that's made out of pine. But it all sits on these steel pins that go down into the frame of the chair. And then again at the top, you've got a little bit of that vintage linoleum just for a little pop of color when you open it up. Um, Another piece that is a little bit different than some of these is this is my roundhouse chandelier. This is made out of cherry. I usually use a white wood like pine or basswood, which is light and soft. But in this piece, I wanted to experiment with using cherry just because it has a really rich, reddish, warm tone to it. And this is a chandelier. It's got one central um, bulb that shines out, and so you get the light that comes through the slats in the architectural elements, but also through all of the window apertures. So it creates a really great patterning on the walls, which is I really love the shadows that it casts. This piece is installed in my house here in Michigan. But I do these on commission as well in various sizes. I'm also always working with um, pushing to work with new materials and sort of push my practice forward. This is another piece that was done with the steamer trunk. This piece was one that I was starting to experiment with using brass. I've always loved the sort of divided windows. And one of the things about working with wood is when you get this thin, which is about an eighth of an inch thin, wood is just too fragile to be able to hold up to um, that dimension. So using brass really um, became a great solution to that. And so each one of these pieces is made out of individual rods of brass, and then they're cut so that they have traditional sort of mechanical joints like half laps, and then they're secured in place. And here's one more piece just to wrap it up. This is another commission. I love working with commissions because they're really challenging in a way that lets me, push my comfort level in the studio a little bit. This is a client in um, Martha's Vineyard, and they have a home there that's close to this historic lighthouse, and they wanted something that sort of reflected that area where they have their home. And so I had this vintage, what's known as a three-way lamp. It's, sort of a style that was popular in the early to mid 1900s, and it has three bulbs that are lower and then one bigger bulb that's at the top. And then it would have traditionally had like some glass lampshades up there. And then this particular piece had a really cool feature, which was there was a tiny light at the bottom that shone through this soapstone that was part of the lamp. So that all gets incorporated and this base into this um, lighthouse structure, and then the railings are again brass. So they create a really um, interesting feel, and they mirror the brass that's part of the light. And of course, I must mention my family, which is really the reason that I am lucky enough to get to do all this. My daughter Bailey, my wife Laurel, and our dog Beans. This is here at our beautiful home and Western Michigan, and I encourage everybody, if you're in the area, we'd love to have you come and visit. And if you're interested in a studio visit, please do reach out. And just a little bit of a shameless plug here at the end, a great quote that I'm sure many of you have heard. Um, Buy from living artists because the dead ones don't need the money.
That's wonderful. I'm glad you ended on that. Thank you so much, Ted. And I think this presentation is perfectly encapsulated why I love this series so much, because anybody who didn't know anything about you or your work, just tuning in at the beginning, might have been ready for like a presentation on log rolling or something. But what you exposited so beautifully on the Enlightenment and neoclassical architecture and showed this exquisite work. So that's what we like to do here at JRACraft, which is educate and deepen everybody's appreciation of really fine craft work like yours. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah, we have just a couple of minutes for some questions. Um, Somebody asks, have you ever had the experience of helping on a construction site or home in the traditional stick method? Do you seek inspiration with the evolution of contemporary architecture and methods?
Yes, I have worked. I've worked when I was in undergraduate. I worked as summers and weekends as a construction assistant. So I worked on a lot of homes that way. And then in the late 20 teens, I worked in upstate New York, and I worked as a design build company, and I actually did a lot of historic restoration and renovation. So we were working on a lot of um, kind of classical Greek revival, that era of buildings. So yeah, as far as modern architecture, I mean, I love modern architecture. I love a lot of it. You know, I stick my toe in there, here and there, but it's certainly my background tends to be a little bit more in the historic building trades. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So, actually, we have a lot of questions. People are very curious about the lights. So I'm going to consolidate the questions we have. One
Mhm.
is, how do you put in the lights? One is, for your works that include lights, several do not show a cord. How does the electricity reach the bulbs? What type of light bulbs do you use for the beautiful, beautiful warm light? So we're going to end on sort of that technical info, and then we'll come back in with some closing remarks.
Sure. Yeah. So the lights, like I mentioned, are mostly these small incandescent bulbs. Um, they're candelabra bulbs, so they're really tiny. And I use like tiny and you know I had to learn a lot about electricity and wiring in order to do that and to do it safely. Um, some of them, a very small number of them, are made with LEDs, which run off of batteries, and then those don't have cords. And then some of them actually have the cords that are just either hidden or removed in the photos because it just simplifies the visual imagery of it. And then for wall hung pieces, I like to design them so that they can either have a cord or they can also be hardwired directly into the wall so that they don't have a cord if you wanted to have them in place without a cord.
Great, thank you. So I want to remind people who are in the DC area that you can come to the presentation in person on Saturday and ask some more of your good questions.
Yeah.
Ted is actually going to demonstrate with bandsaw and everything the making of one of these pieces. As mentioned at the beginning, we do have maybe a few spaces left. So you can go to our website and register, and I think there's information in the chat on that also. And that is, you are our final distinguished artist in our DAS series. So everybody, thank you for attending, and stay tuned on our website for announcements of who will be participating in our next season. So again, thank you very much, Ted, and thank you to everybody for joining us. And there
Sure.
will be, if you missed something or you want to share this presentation, it will be available on the JRACraft YouTube site in a week or so, the recording.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and thanks Rebecca and everybody for putting this on. It's really been fun.
Great. Thanks a lot. Bye, everybody.